Chapter 2, Waging War. This chapter, titled Waging War, does not refer to the initiation of warfare, but rather discusses how to prepare for war, primarily focusing on the preparation of supplies. The previous chapter dealt with pre-war planning. Once plans are set, it's time to move into tangible war preparations. As the saying goes, before the military is mobilized, provisions must be prepared first. If there isn't sufficient economic strength, one should not rashly engage in war. Sun Tzu emphasizes the enormous costs of war, also reflecting his philosophy of cautious warfare. To conserve manpower and resources, Sun Tzu suggests quick battles, because the longer a war drags on, the greater the consumption of manpower and resources. Additionally, he proposes the strategy of living off the enemy, acquiring necessary supplies from the enemy to reduce one's own war expenditures. War is a matter of vital importance to the state and the life and death of its people. If defeated, the nation will suffer immense humiliation and loss. Even in victory, substantial resources will be expended. If one decides to wage war, it's essential to accurately assess the strengths and weaknesses of both sides, have confidence in victory, and be mentally prepared for the war's consumption and losses. To win, one must first be prepared to face the consequences of defeat, as he who does not know the evils of war cannot fully understand the benefits of war. Of course, Sun Tzu is not advocating for rulers or military leaders to be war gamblers. On the contrary, he repeatedly emphasizes the costs of war to promote his philosophy of cautious warfare. To reduce consumption in warfare, Sun Tzu offers two primary strategies. 1. Quick resolution of conflicts. Sun Tzu places great emphasis on swift action in warfare, even more so than on cunning strategies. He advocates for clumsy speed over clever delay. While wisdom is essential in war, if applied correctly, it can not only reduce casualties and financial losses, but also bring the conflict to a swift end. The ideal scenario is to be both clever and quick. However, generals must not treat the battlefield as a stage to showcase their wisdom, nor should they seek to enhance their own prestige at the enemy's expense or deliberately prolong the war to achieve greater glory. The adage, "Time is money," and "Time is life," is most vividly illustrated in war. 2. Utilizing enemy resources. To minimize one's own consumption, it's crucial to devise ways to seize supplies from the enemy, a strategy known as waging war to feed war. Moral judgments aside, war is inherently a life and death struggle. Starving the enemy is preferable to starving oneself. Additionally, capturing the enemy's supply trains and provisions can force them to surrender sooner. Even if not for replenishing one's own supplies, destroying the enemy's strategic materials is an effective way to achieve a quick resolution. It's important to reiterate that even if supplies can be obtained from the enemy, the war should not be prolonged unduly. War consumes not just materials but also lives. While supplies are inanimate, people are not. The extent to which captured soldiers can be utilized by one's own side is highly uncertain. Situations do not always evolve in a manner solely beneficial to one's side. If one's own supplies are captured by the enemy and surrender is not an option, the only solution is to continue mobilizing resources from within the country, which inevitably leads to greater consumption of manpower and resources, far exceeding the proverbial 1,000 gold a day. Throughout history, regardless of the era or region, the long-term stability and security of a nation have always depended on developing production, improving people's livelihoods, and focusing on economic construction. A ruler who excessively engages in military campaigns, despite possibly gaining a reputation for expanding territories in the short term, ultimately brings prolonged disaster to their nation. Sun Tzu, a representative figure in military strategy, never advocated for war or glorified it. On the contrary, he consistently negated war and emphasized its harms. In this sense, Sun Tzu was more of a dove than a hawk. In Sun Tzu's view, waging war inevitably requires national mobilization, utilizing vast amounts of manpower, material, and financial resources. This includes the costs of light and fast chariots, transport vehicles for provisions and arms, expenses for both front and rear operations, diplomatic envoys' travel expenses, supply of equipment and materials, and maintenance and replenishment of weapons. Such endeavors result in spending a fortune daily before a large army can even be deployed. Using such a massive force necessitates a swift and decisive victory. Prolonged conflict will dampen morale, exhaust the troops, and lead to economic difficulties for the nation. Once financial resources are depleted and morale is low, the military loses its combat effectiveness, and the enemy may seize the opportunity to attack. Even if Sun Tzu himself were to lead the forces, he could not reverse the outcome of a failing campaign. Therefore, successful military campaigns are known for their swift conclusion. There are no instances where prolonged warfare has been beneficial to a country. Those who do not fully understand the disadvantages of using troops cannot fully appreciate their advantages. A skilled military leader does not need to repeatedly conscript soldiers or transport provisions multiple times. Weapons and equipment are sourced domestically, and provisions are obtained locally in enemy territory. One of the main reasons a country becomes impoverished due to warfare is the long-distance transportation of provisions. This impoverishes the local population along the route, causes inflation, and depletes the financial resources of the people. When the nation is impoverished, it hastily imposes taxes, depleting military and financial resources, leading to national poverty. Meanwhile, the war continues, with damages to chariots, deaths of war horses, losses of arms and equipment, and reductions in supply trains, all adversely affecting the soldiers at the front. In summary, commanders deeply versed in military strategy are the masters of the people's fate and the cornerstone of the nation's security and stability. Sun Tzu opposes prolonged warfare and advocates for swift resolution. Warmongers are universally despised. Anyone who is belligerent is bound to fail. Qin Shi Huang's militarism initially aligned with historical development needs, as he ended the prolonged chaos of multiple states, unified the fragmented situation, and established a centralized feudal state. However, after unification, he continued to enforce harsh policies and brutal conscriptions, causing widespread suffering among the people. The construction of the Great Wall, though a commendable feat, involved massive manpower, material, and financial resources, comparable to a war in scale. Its prolonged nature further burdened the people, leading to the loss of public support and a mere 15-year reign. Only decisions made with the people's welfare and national security in mind can be considered truly wise. Napoleon of France, a military genius adept at warfare, became unpopular due to his continuous wars and making enemies everywhere. His decision to wage war against Russia during the harsh winter, disregarding public sentiment, was a grave military taboo. As a result, he suffered a crushing defeat at Waterloo and ultimately died in isolation on a desolate island, abandoned by all. Story 1: Li Mu and the Capture of Xiongnu Horses. This story demonstrates a strategic principle emphasized in Sun Tzu's The Art of War, particularly in the chapter on waging war. It highlights the importance of acquiring weapons and soldiers from the enemy and using them to one's advantage. This strategy encourages soldiers to seize enemy chariots and horses, arm themselves, and resolve supply issues on enemy soil, embodying the tactic of waging war to feed war. This strategy was effectively exemplified by Li Mu, a general of the Zhao state during the Warring States period. During this era, the Xiongnu from the north frequently invaded the Zhao state's borders, plundering the wealth and livestock of its people. General Li Mu was tasked with defending Yanmen Pass against these incursions. With limited troops, Li Mu was on the defensive for a considerable time, while the Xiongnu, relying on their strong cavalry, roamed freely and did not take Li Mu seriously. One day, the Xiongnu drove hundreds of fine horses to a river for bathing. Li Mu, observing from a distance at Yanmen Pass, was tempted by the sight. He thought, "If I could capture these horses, it would not only strengthen my forces but also dampen the Xiongnu's spirits. What a great opportunity!" However, Li Mu knew that opening the gates of Yanmen Pass would alert the Xiongnu, who would then drive the horses away, especially since their main army was not far from the river. Watching the spirited horses, Li Mu suddenly devised a clever plan. The Xiongnu stallions could be lured by mares. If we use several hundred mares to attract them across the river and then herd them into the city, wouldn't we effortlessly acquire these fine horses? The city already had the required mares, so there was no need to search far and wide. Li Mu thus ordered the selection of several hundred mares and instructed his soldiers to lead them out of the city, tying them under the trees across the river. Soon after, the mares raised their heads and began to neigh towards the river, where the Xiongnu's stallions were. Hearing the calls of the mares, the stallions on the opposite bank lifted their heads and looked towards the mares on Li Mu's side. A few stallions then started to neigh as if responding to the call of the mares. Subsequently, several stallions took the lead and swam across the river, rushing towards the mares under the trees. With these leaders showing the way, the rest of the herd followed in a frenzy, crossing the river in a wild gallop. The Xiongnu housekeepers tried to stop them but were unable to do so. Zhao soldiers, who had been waiting by the riverbank, seized the opportunity and herded the hundreds of fine horses into Yanmen Pass. Li Mu's ingenious use of local resources, the beautiful horse strategy, to capture hundreds of the Xiongnu's fine horses not only strengthened his own forces but also excellently embodied the military concepts from the art of war, particularly those in the chapter on conducting warfare. These concepts include defeating the enemy and becoming stronger, and turning the enemy to one's advantage. Li Mu's strategy was a perfect illustration of these principles in action. Story 2: The downfall of Qinshi Huang due to overburdening the people and draining resources. Wars are often waged or entered into due to certain interests, such as expanding territories, stabilizing regimes, acquiring resources, plundering wealth, or seeking advantageous positions and initiatives. These can be seen as profitable endeavors. However, war also has its detrimental aspects. The loss of lives and financial resources inevitably damages the economy. Prolonged conflicts increase taxes and labor conscription, affecting normal production and the lives of the people, ultimately leading to national exhaustion and widespread poverty, jeopardizing the country's future. After years of warfare and unifying the country, Qinshi Huang did not adopt policies of recuperation and rejuvenation. Instead of giving the people, who had long suffered from military service, labor conscription, and heavy taxation, a chance to breathe, he intensified his efforts and continued to attack the Xiongnu in the northern borders. His chancellor, Li Si, once advised him that attacking the Xiongnu, though necessary for strengthening border defenses, was harmful and unbeneficial under the current circumstances and would significantly deplete national strength. Qin Shi Huang ignored this advice and stubbornly sent General Meng Tian with an army of 300,000 to attack the Xiongnu. Additionally, he conscripted a large number of adult men throughout the country to build the Great Wall and garrison the frontiers. The stationed soldiers suffered immensely, living in harsh conditions, and countless died or were injured over a decade. To ensure the supply of the frontier troops and civilians, the court also conscripted people to transport grain and supplies by carts and boats. The journey from the coastal areas to the frontiers was long and arduous, with only 1 out of 30 portions of grain reaching its destination. Across the country, men and women toiled in farming and weaving to support their military needs. Many families were ruined financially, and people starved to death by the roadside or fled to mountains and swamps. As a result, the strength of the Qin dynasty was greatly weakened. In 209 BC, the second year after the death of Qin Shi Huang and the ascension of his son, Qin Shi, more than 900 conscripts, including Qin Xing and Wu Guan, who were on their way to garrison the frontiers, encountered continuous heavy rain, causing a delay in their journey. Fearing execution for their tardiness, they decided to start a rebellion. The uprising led by Qin Xing and Wu Guang received widespread support across the country. Within just 2 years, the main forces of the Qin army were annihilated one by one, and the newly enthroned King Xiong of Qin had no choice but to surrender to the rebel forces. Previously, the Qin army had been invincible in the wars that unified the 6 states, seemingly unstoppable. However, just as a bowstring cannot be over-tightened, prolonged and costly wars cannot be sustained indefinitely. A prolonged war depletes the state's resources. In the subsequent campaigns against the Xiongnu and the construction of the Great Wall, not only were the state's reserves exhausted, but the common people also could no longer bear the heavy burden, leading to extremely sharp social conflicts. Thus, when someone called to arms, there was an immediate widespread response, and the once mighty Qin dynasty quickly collapsed from within. Story 3: The Decisive Ban Chao. During the Eastern Han Dynasty, Ban Chao assisted his brother Ban Gu in writing the Book of Han. However, he often thought that a man's ambition should not be confined to pen and paper. Thus, he abandoned his scholarly pursuits for a military career and joined the war against the Xiongnu. His resolute and decisive character earned him numerous accolades on the battlefield. Later, to form alliances with the western regions against the Xiongnu invasion, the Eastern Han Dynasty sent Ban Chao as an envoy to these regions. Ban Chao set off with a retinue of 36 people, carrying the imperial staff of the Han Dynasty. Their first stop was the kingdom of Shanshan. Upon meeting the king of Shanshan, Ban Chao said, "Your Majesty, I am sent by the emperor of the great Han Dynasty, hoping that we can unite against the Xiongnu. We have both suffered from their invasions, so we should join forces. Only then will the Xiongnu dare not act recklessly." The king of Shanshan, having heard of the mighty Han Dynasty, was impressed by the dignity and grandeur of the Han envoy and nodded in agreement, saying, "You speak well. Please stay in our country for now, and we will discuss the alliance against the Xiongnu in a few days." Thus, Ban Chao and his party stayed in Shanshan. Initially, they were warmly received, but soon Ban Chao noticed the king's growing indifference and frequent excuses to avoid meeting them. Even when they did meet, the king avoided discussing the alliance against the Xiongnu. Ban Chao sensed something ominous and convened a meeting with his delegation, saying, "The king's attitude is increasingly unfriendly. I suspect the Xiongnu have also sent envoys to persuade him. We need to investigate and uncover the truth." That night, Ban Chao sent someone to secretly enter the palace, where they found the king drinking and chatting amicably with the Xiongnu envoys. The spy quickly reported back to Ban Chao. In the following days, Ban Chao learned from their host that the Xiongnu had not only sent envoys but also over 100 fully armed attendants and guards. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Ban Chao immediately convened his delegation to discuss their next move. Ban Chao addressed his group, saying, "As expected, the Xiongnu have sent their envoys, and their arguments have swayed the king of Shanshan. We are in grave danger. If we don't take decisive action now, once the king fully sides with the Xiongnu, we will become the sacrificial pawns in their alliance. Then, not only our lives but also the mission entrusted to us by our nation will be in jeopardy. What should we do?" Everyone agreed. "We will follow your command." Ban Chao, with determination, slammed his hand on the table and declared, "One cannot capture tiger cubs without entering the tiger's den. To accomplish our mission, we must resolve to eliminate the Xiongnu envoys." That night, Ban Chao led a surprise attack on the Xiongnu camp. Catching them off guard, they overpowered the Xiongnu with fewer numbers, killing all over 100 of them. The next day, Ban Chao confronted the king of Shanshan with the heads of the Xiongnu envoys, rebuking him. "Your actions are disgraceful. You promised an alliance with us, yet secretly dealt with the Xiongnu. Now their envoys are dead. It's your move." The king, both shocked and frightened, quickly signed an alliance treaty with the Han dynasty. Ban Chao's actions sent shockwaves throughout the western regions. Other countries swiftly signed treaties with the Han dynasty, expressing their desire for a lasting friendship. Ban Chao successfully completed his mission. Ban Chao was a master of adapting to changing situations. In critical moments, he made swift, irreversible decisions that forced his opponents into a corner, leaving them no choice but to follow the course he set. Don't miss out on this potentially life-changing opportunity. If you want to gain more insightful wisdom, go ahead and tap that like button, subscribe to our channel, and help us keep producing high-quality content. And don't forget to click the bell icon below the video, so you'll be the first to receive our latest updates, and never miss a chance to enhance yourself.